Loughgall, County Armagh, Friday the 8th of May, 1987, about 20 minutes past 7 in the evening. It's a village of a few hundred people in orchard country, roughly 8 miles east of Dungannon. The RUC station on the main street isn't much of a target. It opens part-time, 9 to 11 in the morning, 5 to 7 at night. On a Friday evening, it's supposed to be empty. At the far end of the village, a blue Toyota HiAce van comes into view. Behind it, moving at the speed of farm machinery, is a JCB digger taken from a farm 2 miles away a few hours earlier. In the front bucket of the digger is an oil drum packed with explosive. Accounts vary, but the figure sits somewhere in the range of 200 to 400 pounds, and a man is lighting the fuse. The men in that van and on that digger are the East Tyrone Brigade of the Provisional IRA. They have done this before. 9 months earlier, on the 11th of August 1986, they levelled an RUC station at a place called the Birches using the same method. A stolen JCB, a bomb in the bucket, and it worked perfectly. The station was destroyed, the unit got away clean, nobody in the IRA died. What they don't know is that the hedgerows, the ditches and the buildings around them have been occupied for some time. 6 SAS soldiers in plain clothes are inside the station. 18 more, in uniform, are concealed in 5 positions in wooded areas surrounding it. RUC Headquarters Mobile Support Unit officers are positioned inside as well. The operation is codenamed Judy. The digger goes through the fence, the bomb goes off. And then, for a period that those present on both sides have described very differently, military accounts compress it to seconds, the IRA scouts watching from down the road stretch it to 3 or 4 minutes. Several hundred rounds are fired into that stretch of road. When it stops, 8 members of the IRA are dead. It's the worst single-incident loss the organisation has suffered since the early 1920s. And a man who had spent the afternoon doing vehicle repairs at a friend's farm, driving home with his brother in a white Citroën, is dead roughly 130 yards from the station, killed by soldiers who took the car for part of the attack. This video handles 3 separate things, and will keep them separate: what happened, why it happened, and what the courts did about it afterwards. A legal argument that ran for more than a decade and isn't finished today. The sources drawn on here include Mark Urban's Big Boys Rules, Ed Maloney's A Secret History of the IRA, Lost Lives by McKittrick, Kelters, Feeney and Thornton, the standard record of every death in the Troubles, Jonathan Trigg's Death in the Fields, the IRA in East Tyrone, and Toby Harnden's Bandit Country. The legal section is built from the primary judgment text, not from secondary coverage. To understand what Loughgall was for, you have to understand what Jim Lynagh was arguing. Lynagh was born on the 13th of April 1956 on the Tully estate in Monaghan Town in the Republic of Ireland, one of 12 children from a family with no prior Republican tradition. He joined the Provisional IRA in the early 1970s and in December 1973, at 17, was badly injured in a premature bomb explosion near Moy in County Tyrone. He was arrested, convicted of possession of explosives, and served approximately 5 years in the Maze prison. That imprisonment is where the argument started. He read Mao Zedong in there, extensively. By the time he was released in 1978 and elected a Sinn Féin councillor for Monaghan Urban District Council the following year, a seat he held until his death, he had a theory about how the war should be fought. The RUC knew him as the Executioner. Inside the organisation, he was beginning to be known as something more unsettling: a thinker. The theory was Maoist in its structure, the mainstream IRA approach of the 1980s, what Ed Maloney characterises in A Secret History of the IRA as the armed propaganda model, assumed that sustained attritional killing would eventually make the British government move. Lynagh didn't accept that premise. He thought territory was what mattered. You had to take it and hold it. His model worked in phases. Start in a Republican stronghold. East Tyrone was the obvious candidate, though South Armagh, where British troops hadn't used the roads in years for fear of landmines and long-range fire, was already proof the concept could work. Destroy the isolated rural police stations systematically. When contractors came to rebuild them, intimidate or kill them too. Create contiguous zones where the British state couldn't physically stand up a garrison. Expand those zones outward, station by station, until there were places where the Crown's writ simply didn't run. Jonathan Trigg, a former British Army officer who interviewed members of the East Tyrone Brigade for his book Death in the Fields, and whose 2 Good Listener podcast episodes on the unit together reached well over 100,000 views, which tells you something about the appetite for exactly this kind of professional assessment, records the observation current in British Army circles at the time. In Belfast, the provos were trying to make the 6 o'clock news. In East Tyrone, they were trying to kill you. That distinction matters. East Tyrone under Lynagh wasn't running a propaganda campaign. It was prosecuting a territorial one. The intelligence assessment literature is blunter still. The study Agents of Influence, drawing on RUC evaluations of the period, notes that the force knew better than anyone how seriously the IRA's soft target strategy was beginning to hurt, especially under the direction of Jim Lynagh. Padraig McKierney was the closest thing Lynagh had to a co-author of the Doctrine. Born on the 18th of December 1954 in Moy, County Tyrone, he had been imprisoned for IRA activity, and on the 25th of September 1983 was among 38 prisoners who broke out of the maze, the largest prison escape in British history. He was never recaptured. By early 1984, he was back in East Tyrone, back in the organisation, and by all accounts working closely with Lynagh on what the war should become. McGill magazine described McKierney as avowedly militant and Lynagh's soulmate. It also recorded what the conflict had cost his family. 3 sons of the McKierney household were killed during the Troubles. 1 in a premature explosion, 1 by UVF gunmen, Padraig at Loughgall. His brother Tommy, who participated in the 1980 hunger strike and survived, later wrote a serious analytical history of the Provisional IRA. Jonathan Trigg's Death in the Fields records the family's total in a single flat line. Over a period of 20 years, only 1 of the 6 McKierney children escaped death, imprisonment, or the police. Patrick Kelly, born the 19th of March 1957, took command of the East Tyrone Brigade around 1985. He was aligned with what Lynagh and McKierney were arguing, and his command structure was what gave the theory operational form. In December 1985, the brigade attacked the RUC barracks in Ballygawley under his direction. 2 officers killed, the station destroyed. That was the opening proof. The GHQ in Belfast, under the Adams-era leadership, didn't reject what Lynagh and McKierney were proposing, but it didn't fully endorse it either. Northern Command approved a scaled-down version. Maloney's account of what that meant is precise. A sort of flying column was set up, but it came together only for specific operations, and that made it very different from the full-time and secure column Lynagh and McKierney had in mind. They felt it fell far short of the sort of tactic they believed could cause a qualitative shift of fortune in the IRA's direction. A former Republican, interviewed for a peer-reviewed academic study published in 2024, described how Lynagh's approach was understood inside the organisation. He wanted to take areas and hold areas like a no-go zone. Lynagh was very well respected and was a thinker and a strategist. The Birches and Loughgall ASUs were, in fact, flying columns. It was called the Tet Offensive. A senior brigade figure, Kevin McKenna, called the strategy too impractical, too ambitious, and not sustainable. He was probably right about the practical limits. But the fact that people were arguing about it in those terms tells you this wasn't a bombing campaign dressed up in doctrine. It was a doctrine. And by August 1986, it had a proof of concept. The 11th of August 1986. The RUC station at the Birches near Portadown, County Armagh. Unmanned. A stolen JCB digger, hijacked at Washing Bay that morning, approaches the perimeter fence with a 200-pound bomb packed inside an oil drum in its front bucket. An IRA unit simultaneously rakes the building with automatic gunfire from a van. A diversionary bomb detonates at Pomeroy in County Tyrone to draw security forces away from the real target. The digger crashes through the high wire fence. The bomb explodes. The station is destroyed. 3 civilians are slightly injured. The IRA unit withdraws by boat across Lynagh and is gone before anyone has mounted a coordinated response. About 35 people were involved across all the roles: planning, the diversion, the attack, the escape route. Patrick Kelly led it. Jim Lynagh was there. So was Padraig McKerney. The JCB appears to have been driven by a 21-year-old who had experience with farm machinery, Declan Arthurs. That is the register the East Tyrone Brigade merited, a professional appraisal of a capable enemy. The Birches was a spectacular, as Urban called it, in both senses, technically impressive and publicly visible. The brigade had now demonstrated twice in 8 months that it could level an isolated rural RUC station and vanish before any response arrived. Ballygawley in December 1985. The Birches in August 1986. The method worked. A method that works twice is one the other side can study. The Birches was studied. Loughgall was on the list. Loughgall ticked every criterion. Part-time, lightly manned, light perimeter fence, small rural village, poor rapid reinforcement access. The plan was identical to the Birches. A stolen JCB, a bomb in the bucket, a van with armed men, timed to catch the officers coming off duty at 7 in the evening. The security forces had been briefed on this operation specifically. The exact source of that intelligence is addressed shortly. What is confirmed is what followed from it. The 3 local officers were quietly replaced inside the station by a uniformed RUC constable, 2 HMSU officers and 6 SAS soldiers in plain clothes. Another 18 SAS soldiers were concealed in 5 positions in wooded areas surrounding it. The operation was named Judy. The total number of security force personnel deployed has never been officially confirmed. Journalistic accounts from the period and later put the SAS contingent at approximately 24. One report cited 36. Neither figure comes from a state source. The lower one is the more frequently repeated estimate and should be understood as that. Hours before the attack, the unit hijacked its vehicles. The blue Toyota HiAce was stolen from a business in Dungannon, and Jim Lynagh was spotted in Dungannon at the same time, which indicated the van was being commandeered for an imminent operation. The JCB was taken from a farm on Lynagh Road, 2 miles west of Loughgall. 2 IRA men stayed at the farm to prevent the owners raising the alarm. The unit arrived in Loughgall from the northeast shortly after 7 in the evening. They wore bulletproof vests, boiler suits, gloves and balaclavas. Armed with Heckler & Koch G3 rifles, an FN-FAL, 2 FN-FNC rifles, a Franke Spaz 12 shotgun and a Ruger Security 6 revolver, weapons the RUC would later link to 7 murders and 12 attempted murders in mid-Ulster. Ballistics work completed by 2017 showed those weapons had been used in 40 to 50 killings in total, including every IRA-caused fatality in Fermanagh and Tyrone in 1987, before the 8th of May. They made 2 slow passes of the station. Something felt wrong. The building looked empty, but the unit was uneasy. According to accounts from the surviving scouts, some members argued for aborting. Patrick Kelly decided to go ahead. Tony Gormley and Gerard O'Callaghan got out of the van and climbed onto the digger alongside Arthur's. The remaining 5, Eugene Kelly driving, Patrick Kelly in the front passenger seat, and in the rear Jim Lynagh, Padraig McKerney and Seamus Donnelly. At roughly 7:15, Arthur's drove the digger at the fence. The explosive in the bucket, sources give figures ranging from 200 to 400 pounds, packed into an oil drum, wired to 2 40-second fuses, partially concealed by rubble, crashed through the light perimeter. The fuses were lit. The van stopped ahead of the station. Patrick Kelly jumped from the passenger seat. The unit opened fire on the building with automatic weapons. The SAS soldiers returned fire from inside the station and from the concealed positions outside with M16 rifles, G3 rifles and 2 L7A2 general-purpose machine guns. The bomb detonated. It destroyed most of the station and damaged buildings further down the main street. 2 HMSU officers inside suffered injuries from the blast, 1 severely, 1 a broken nose. An SAS soldier took a facial wound from glass broken by gunfire. None of the security force personnel died. How long the exchange lasted depends entirely on whose account you use. Military sources compress it to seconds. One of the 3 IRA scouts watching from down the road described it going on and on and on for what seemed like 3 or 4 minutes, fierce firing. 600 spent cartridge cases from British weapons were recovered from the scene, 78 from IRA weapons. Whether any of the 8 men fired, and in what sequence, was disputed in the inquest proceedings and hasn't been settled to general satisfaction. The Historical Inquiries team of the PSNI, publishing its findings in December 2011, concluded the IRA unit fired first and couldn't have been safely arrested, and that the SAS were justified in opening fire. Those findings have been contested. All 8 members of the attack unit died, all from multiple gunshot wounds, including head wounds. The inquest jury confirmed this on the 2nd of June 1995. Declan Arthurs was shot in a laneway opposite the Loughgall football ground with a cigarette lighter still in his hand. The 8 dead, according to Lost Lives, the record compiled by David McKittrick, Seamus Kelters, Brian Feeney and Chris Thornton, which is the standard biographical source for every death in the Troubles. Patrick Joseph Kelly, 30, East Tyrone Brigade Commander. Jim Lynagh, 31, from Monaghan Town in the Republic. Padraig McKerney, 32, from Moy, County Tyrone. Gerard O'Callaghan, 29. Eugene Kelly, 25. Tony Gormley, listed as 24 or 25 in different accounts. The age is contested in sources. Declan Arthurs, 21. Seamus Donnelly, 19, the youngest. Thousands attended the funerals, the largest Republican funerals in Northern Ireland since those of the hunger strikers in 1981. At Jim Lynagh's, Gerry Adams delivered a graveside address. The British government, he said, does not understand the Jim Lynaghs, the Padraig McKerneys. It thinks it can defeat them. It never will. The men became known among Republicans as the Loughgall Martyrs. 3 members of a support unit in scout cars managed to slip through security checkpoints after the ambush. One, briefly stopped by a soldier, had a clear view of the van and what had been done to it. "I could see the carnage down at the van," he said later. "I have no doubt it was a shoot-to-kill operation. It was a turkey shoot." That phrase requires a brief note. Shoot-to-kill wasn't a neutral description in 1987, and it isn't now. It had been in political circulation since at least 1984, when a series of incidents involving the RUC led to the appointment of Deputy Chief Constable John Stalker to investigate allegations that the security forces were operating a policy of killing rather than arresting suspects. The phrase carried, and carries, a specific political argument, not a factual description of any established official policy. The scout who used it was making an accusation. The British government used different language. That argument ended up in a European court. The village had not been warned. No roadblocks had been set up before the attack, because setting them up might have alerted the IRA. The decision not to seal off the ambush zone left a gap, and Anthony Hughes drove into it. Anthony Hughes was 36 years old. He was from Caledon, County Tyrone. He was married with 3 children. He and his brother Oliver had spent the afternoon at a friend's farm working on a vehicle. They were driving home in a white Citroën GS, registration OIA 3428, when they came into Loughgall during or immediately after the firefight. Soldiers opened fire on the car from behind. Anthony was in the driver's seat. He was killed instantly. Oliver, in the passenger seat and wearing blue overalls, was shot multiple times, 14 gunshot wounds by one account. He got out of the car, despite being told not to move, fell to the ground, and received first aid from 2 soldiers. He survived. The car took approximately 34 bullet holes. The distance from the station, roughly 130 yards. Some narrative accounts describe both brothers wearing overalls similar to the IRA unit's boiler suits, offered as the explanation for why soldiers opened fire. The pathologist's report on Anthony, examined later by the Pat Finucane Centre, is specific about his clothing. A polo neck pullover and jeans, and the report notes directly that there was no boiler suit, hood or gloves on the body. The visual explanation, Oliver in blue overalls in the passenger seat, an approaching car in the midst of an active engagement, may account for the soldier's decision. What the evidence from the car and its occupants establishes, and what it leaves open, was among the questions the inquest was eventually ordered to address. Anthony Hughes had no connection to any paramilitary organisation. The British government later formally apologised and acknowledged he was wholly innocent of any wrongdoing. His widow Brigid settled civil proceedings against the Ministry of Defence in April 1991 for £100,000. In the days immediately following the 8th of May 1987, the ambush dominated both the Irish Times and the Belfast Telegraph. The framing differed as sharply as the politics always did. Nationalist-leaning coverage centred on the civilian death and questioned the absence of any warning to village residents. Unionist and British coverage emphasised the weapons recovered and the operational significance of destroying a brigade that had been responsible for dozens of killings across mid-Ulster. Both things were in the same set of facts. How you assembled them depended entirely on which question you thought the event answered. Every viewer of this video is waiting for the same question. How did they know? The specific source of the intelligence has never been publicly established by any state body. What is confirmed, the security forces had forewarning specific enough to deploy a substantial force covertly, evacuate the station without alerting the IRA, and prepare positions in advance. That implies specific intelligence rather than routine general surveillance. The evacuation of the station is the clearest publicly known indicator that the security forces knew the target and the method before the 8th of May. The Belfast Telegraph reported in 2018 that the unit had been under military surveillance for weeks before the attack. Multiple sources indicate the specific target, Loughgall, was identified at least 10 days out. The competing explanations divide into two broad categories. The first is a human source, someone inside or close to the East Tyrone Brigade. The second is technical surveillance, monitoring of weapons, vehicles or communications. A 2017 book by a former British Army intelligence officer claimed there was no informer at all, that the operation was discovered when the Army observed a known IRA man scouting construction sites for a digger to steal. Another account suggests intelligence came through a telephone tap. Richard English, former professor of politics at Queen's University Belfast, has written that the information didn't come from within the attack unit itself, though he also noted that one unit member, Tony Gormley, was known to security forces as a well-paid special branch informant. None of these accounts resolves it. The source has never been named by any official body. Several versions of this story have named specific individuals over the years. None of those claims has been established in open sources, and treating unverified claims about informers as settled fact is both factually wrong and legally problematic. What is established is the consequence inside the IRA. Ed Maloney records in A Secret History of the IRA that the aftermath left a huge black cloud of suspicion about the identity and motives of those who may have betrayed the East Tyrone Brigade. The organisation spent years trying to find the source. Some accounts suggest the informer, if there was one, died in the ambush itself, which would explain why the IRA's internal investigations never produced a definitive answer. Whether that is accurate or is a story the organisation told itself to manage the uncertainty isn't something the available record resolves. The post-Loughgall period in East Tyrone is characterised across multiple sources as one of intense internal anxiety. The brigade kept fighting, but it did so in an organisation that now had reason to suspect itself. The families of the 8 IRA men and the family of Anthony Hughes began legal proceedings. The cases took more than a decade to reach the European Court of Human Rights. The judgment, Kelly and others, versus the United Kingdom, application number 30054/96, decided the 4th of May 2001, was delivered as part of a group of Northern Ireland judgments issued the same day, alongside Hugh Jordan versus the United Kingdom and McCurr versus the United Kingdom, all concerning the adequacy of investigations into conflict-era killings. The court's finding wasn't that the soldiers acted unlawfully. That sentence needs to be precise, and it will be stated again. because this is the finding most commonly misreported in both directions. What the court found was a procedural violation of Article 2 of the European Convention on Human Rights. Article 2 protects the right to life. Its procedural dimension requires the state, when its agents cause a death, to conduct an effective, independent and prompt investigation. The court found that the inquest as conducted in 1995 didn't meet that standard. The SAS soldiers didn't appear in person. Their statements were read into the record. Lawyers representing 6 of the families withdrew on the second day when the coroner refused to provide witness statement copies, which prevented them from adequately preparing. The proceedings were found to be inadequate as an investigative mechanism. The court awarded £10,000 to the families of each of the 8 IRA men killed, and a separate sum in relation to Anthony Hughes in recognition of that procedural failure. The Director of Public Prosecutions for Northern Ireland had concluded in September 1988 that no prosecution of anyone involved in the shootings was warranted. That finding wasn't overturned. The court didn't find the soldiers acted unlawfully. The finding was about the inquest system, the mechanism by which the state is supposed to account for what its agents do, not about the decisions made on the road in Loughgall. For those who consider human rights proceedings on behalf of men who drove a bomb into a police station to be inherently inappropriate, there is a direct answer. The procedural obligation under Article 2 exists because when the state uses lethal force, it can't self-certify the adequacy of that force. The independent investigation is the mechanism. The finding at Loughgall was that the mechanism didn't work, not that the force was wrong. The finding was about the inquest, not the trigger. The Historical Inquiries team of the PSNI published its findings in December 2011. The IRA unit fired first, the members couldn't have been safely arrested, the SAS were justified in opening fire. In 2015, Advocate General Jeremy Wright ordered new inquests into all 9 Loughgall deaths. In 2023, the coroner concluded there was insufficient time to complete the inquest before the 1st of May 2024, the deadline imposed by the Northern Ireland Troubles Legacy and Reconciliation Act 2023. The inquest was halted. Cases were routed to the Independent Commission for Reconciliation and Information Recovery. In March 2025, the Secretary of State committed to the restoration of the Loughgall inquest specifically. Bridget Hughes, Anthony's widow, had an active filing at the UK Supreme Court. The story of Loughgall is 39 years old. It's still in court. Jim Lynagh had an argument. Not a slogan and not a bombing campaign. A theory. Developed reading Mao in the Maze in the mid-1970s, refined alongside Patrick Kelly and Padraig McKerney, tested at Ballygawley and then more fully at the Birches, about how a small organisation could take physical territory off a modern state. Station by station, in the fields of Tyrone and Armagh, until there were places where the Crown's writ didn't run. On the 8th of May 1987, that argument was answered in approximately the time it takes to boil a kettle. The East Tyrone Brigade kept fighting. The brigade kept going back and kept being met. The specific strategy that Loughgall terminated, the systematic destruction of isolated rural stations as a mechanism for creating and holding territory, didn't survive the 8th of May. The brigade attacked the Loughgall station again in September 1990 with a £1,000 van bomb, but the station was unmanned. A warning was given, and the objective was different. There was no second attempt at anything resembling Loughgall as a concept. A unit in the open, pressing a territorial claim with a method that had worked before. A method that loses 8 men in under a minute isn't a method you repeat. The war continued for another decade and ended not in the fields of Tyrone and Armagh, but at a table in Belfast, the Good Friday Agreement, signed the 10th of April 1998. By that point, the IRA's political wing had concluded that the electoral route could deliver more than the armed campaign. It was, in the end, precisely the settlement Lynagh's strategy was designed to prevent. His argument was that territorial control would make negotiation irrelevant, because the state would have something to lose beyond the political will to keep paying the cost. That argument never got the chance to be tested at scale. Whether eliminating Lynagh and McKerney changed the direction of the war, or whether the direction would have shifted anyway as Adams consolidated political control of the movement, is a question the evidence can frame but not finally answer. What can be said is that the East Tyrone Brigade, after the 8th of May 1987, never tried to hold ground again. The 9th man who died that evening was a vehicle repairman from Caledon who had spent the afternoon fixing machinery at a friend's farm and was on his way home. He had nothing to do with any of it. His widow settled for £100,000 in 1991 and has been in legal proceedings every year since. His brother, who took 14 shots and survived, has spent 39 years trying to have the circumstances of that car journey formally examined. Anthony Hughes is the part of Loughgall that no version of this history handles comfortably. He fits neither account, not the Republican narrative centred on 8 volunteers, not the security force account centred on an operation's success. He is the reason the case is still in front of a court, and the clearest evidence that a carefully planned intelligence operation left an ambush zone open to the road in a village whose residents had not been warned. Did it work? The Doctrine died. The men who held it died. The brigade kept fighting in different forms and kept dying in different ambushes. The war ended somewhere else entirely, a decade later, in a way none of them had planned for. Whether Loughgall is what caused that outcome, or merely what preceded it, that is the question this story leaves open.